Boy, you're doing a lot of eating. I hope you know how to turn a wrench. Well, it's a very cold but beautiful day out. The storm's finally settled. It got down to about 1 degree and there were like 40-mile-an-hour gusts. So there were a lot of trees coming down and whatnot. And it had me a little nervous and wondering, because I thought for sure the power was going to go out. It didn't. But I had my generator out in the field. Here it is. It's all covered in snow. It's frozen. It's been the tundra for about 2 weeks. And I completely forgot about it. I was using it to do a welding job down by the woods, and I forgot it out there. So this gives me the prime excuse to do a YouTube video and show how I am going to prep a generator for winter or any storm that you may need it for. All right, so I got the thing in the garage. I let it sit overnight, so that way there's no more snow on it and it's nice and warm. Now what I'm going to do is use engine degreaser, and let's degrease the engine, because it is messy, and you can see that I have not gotten to this thing in a few years. So let's give this thing hearty shots of degreaser here. Now, generators are interesting pieces of equipment because, you know, when you need them, and you don't want to be farting around with them when you need them. The other thing is they get forgotten about and lost. And this generator, I take with me everywhere when I need to weld something in the field. I fire it up, weld it in the field. Works great. Or if I need to power half of my house, I plug this in, and it powers literally half of my house. It does a really good job. But it is time to give this thing an oil change. And I haven't done an oil change in this thing in probably 3 years. And it's sad to say, because I use the hell out of it, but that is the truth, guys. So let's take a look and see what the oil looks like in this thing. Nice and black. See that? It's not terrible. I've seen blacker, but it is, you know, it's black. So we want to change this out. So changing out the oil on these is really easy and straightforward. And you can do it in 2 different ways. One way is you have your drain plug right here. Okay, you can get your adjustable, spin that off, and oil will drain right to the floor. It can be messy. You want to get a little pan. Another thing you can use is a suction device. I have this suction device where literally I am going to put this into the crankcase, and I will be evacuating the oil. And you can see as I crank it, oil is coming up. So I'm going to pump this down, and then we will refill the oil. And that's the sound of it being empty. All right, for refilling this engine, I'm going to use Wolf's Head Heavy Duty Straight 30 weight. All right, so I'm going to take my funnel, and I believe this motor is probably only going to take like 1 quart, but this one's almost full, so let's see how it does with this. Okay, so it's got almost 1 quart in it, so let's thread this in all the way and see how we make out on our fill line. And man, it says we are full. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to replace the fuel filter on this thing. You see, this is an old one, and we're going to put a nice high flow one in its place. First thing you're going to want to do is shut the fuel off to here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this connection. See, some of the fuel coming out is yellow. So you're going to want to look for an arrow, and you can see there's an arrow going this way. So they want the flow to go this way. Okay. And same thing here. Let's put these clamps back on. Okay, so now we got these clamped up. So I'm going to leave the fuel off, and now what I'm going to do is take my carburetor off, and I want to clean the carburetor. As we're prepping to take off the carburetor, first I'm going to take off the air cleaner. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So that's the air cleaner. Yeah, it could use a new one. It's seen better days, but we're just going to blow it out. I am not too worried about this. One thing I am going to do while I'm here is I'm going to spray carburetor cleaner all throughout in here. So I'm going to let that sit a little bit. Next one I'm going to do is take the bowl off. The bowl is right under here. This is a good old American unit. Everything's standard. Going to take a 7/16 to the bottom of this carburetor, and I am going to loosen this up. And we're going to let that fuel just drip out onto my towel here. Remember, we kept the fuel off. Then I take out my little needle valves. This is a needle control flow valve. And this is how you can tune your carburetor in a little bit on this unit. I'm going to slowly rock back, pull this puppy out. We can take a look at what it looks like. Yeah, I see some yellowing in the gas, so the gas is getting old. I do have a lot of additives and fuel additives in here to help out, but there is some dirt and debris, but not terrible. So I'm going to slowly pull down on the gasket here. You always want to try and remove it, because if you can't remove it and it's going to crack, it's just going to fail on you anyway. Alright, I jacked the unit up a little bit to make it easier for me to work on. Once that's down and drained, I am going to break this off here. There we go. So I loosen that one up, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, I'm just going to loosen this one up. And once this one comes out, then I can drop the whole unit. Okay. So now that both those bolts are free, I can now break this. And you can see that the gasket is not coming with this unit. That's okay. Don't fret over that. You're going to want to replace this gasket anyway. Alright, so now that we have the carburetor fully out, this is the gasket. You're going to want to get a rebuild kit whenever you rebuild these engines. Any rebuild kit, any carburetor rebuild kit you get when doing these engines will come with new gaskets. I have quite a few of these laying around. Definitely get a rag, and you're going to use your fingers. You want some sort of abrasion just to get any heavy crap that won't come off, and then hit it one more time with the starter fluid or with the carburetor cleaner. Alright, I'm going to let that sit. I'm going to go get the air compressor, and I'm going to blow air through this main jet hole here. Once you get your compressed air hooked up, I'm going to take your air gun and blow it through here. So now that everything is blown out, I am going to reinstall everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull out the float. You can replace this at any time. The needle valve already dropped out for me, so that's why I'm pulling this out, because I'm going to reinstall the needle valve. So this little needle valve is your fuel shutoff or fuel supply valve. So I'm going to throw this puppy on the float here, and then I'm going to drop this thing in the hole. And with it like that, I'm going to line up the marks and install the hinge, which is this pin here. And there you go. And now you want to check to make sure your needle valve is opening and closing. And it's acting as it should. Clean out our little needle valve here. And same thing, we're going to want to blow this out with the air gun. We're looking pretty clean. And again, you want to check your bottom gasket here. This looks really good, so we're going to reinstall it. With our new gasket on here, now we're going to install the bowl cap back on. Some bowl caps have notches like this, and you can see them inside. When there's a notch like this, this is the low end, which is where the float's going to float to. This is your high end where your hinge is. So we're going to mount it like so. All right, so with the bowl cap installed, what you're going to want to put on is your final bolt on the bottom. Sometimes these are just a bolt, bolting the bowl to the main jet stem here. Sometimes this is another mixing valve that they use. We have a mixing valve here, which we're going to use to help tune this motor. We're threading this on. All right, so with the carburetor put back together, I put the fuel hose line back on, and now I am tightening up these nuts. So now that that bolt is snug and this bolt is snug, we have a carburetor that is back fully connected. So I'm turning the fuel valve back on, and we can see that this is filling up with fuel. And what we're going to check now to make sure is that nothing is leaking. So you're going to want to touch. I don't feel anything leaking down here, so that's good. It means that the gasket's sealed well. So if you guys remember, I tightened this bottom control valve by finger. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quarter turn to make it snug. And that's as far as I'm going, and that is plenty snug. Really not much is coming out. It's more like stained than anything. All right, let's put this back on. That's in there nice and tight. And let's put this back on. And... all right, so the only thing left to do is to actually run it and then check the power coming out of this thing. One thing that I also add into the fuel tank of these generators is water zorb. So you saw that this thing had a lot of snow and ice around it. Because it is used outside, and I leave it outside. I'm not the best with taking care of this generator, because when I need it to run 24/7 out in the snow. So it is very susceptible to getting water, snow, and ice into the fuel tank. So what I use to combat that is this gasoline water zorb. All right. So this for 1 ounce of this, it treats about 18 gallons. I'm going to put a shot glass in this thing, so that's about 2 ounces. Yes, it is an overdose, but I want to make sure I'm sucking up any of the crud and crap that could potentially be getting in here. This is a Tecumseh 10 horsepower motor. On the side of the motors, there are a nameplate, and you're going to want to see what model this one is. And this is an HM100. And the reason why you want to know what model it is, because you want to know what the spark plug gap should be on the spark plug. All right, you're going to want to remove the boot and the connector off of the spark plug wire and set that off to the side. And then we're going to use a 13/16 spark plug socket here. And we're going to drop that right in with our extension. We can see what the spark plug looks like, and then we can gap check it. Alright, so we took out the old spark plug, and the one thing I'm always interested in is what the gap is. Now the gap is supposed to be 30 thousandths per this motor. So I got my 30 thousandths little gauge here, and it fits in here pretty easily. So this is probably a little bigger than 30 thousandths, but really it's not too bad. It's not terrible. I thought it would be a lot worse, but I can run through this really easy. Now this is the brand new spark plug. We're going with an Autolite spark plug here. That's the only one I was able to get at the store, believe it or not. I'm going to gap check this brand new one. And if I try to put my 30 thousandths wedge, it is tight, but guess what? It does go in there. So I'm going to do a little gap check here. 30 thousandths gap here, and it goes in. But it is tight. Definitely tight. So that's good. We're going to put this brand new Autolite in there. It's an Autolite 458. Alright, so I'm getting ready to start the generator now that we did all the maintenance work to it. And one thing I want to show you and take time to show you is, so we're expecting this generator to put out 120 volts and to put out 60 hertz because that is what our city electric supply is. And what I want to show you is we're going to do a quick little test. So I'm going to put my meter on. All right, we're going to take my 2 leads and we're going to test the voltage coming out of the outlet here. So when I put my prongs into the outlet to test it, I see I have 123 volts AC, 123 volt AC. And we're looking to get 120 volts. So the next thing we're going to check is what is the hertz should we be seeing? Because in the United States, we should be seeing 60 hertz. So let me switch this over to AC hertz. And when we do a test here, we have 60 hertz on the money pretty much. So that's what we're looking to see coming out of our generator. So let's test it. So the bad thing about these generators is they're just so damn noisy. And they're so noisy that it's hard to hear, it's hard to talk, and instead of me shouting on what's going on, I figured I'd narrate the video. So here I'm grabbing the voltmeter just like you saw inside the house. And what I'm setting the voltmeter to is voltage AC. And now I'm just sticking the prongs in the outlet just to see what voltage is coming out. And if I can get my hand steady enough, you can see that we're getting 130 volts. So it's bouncing between 129 and 130. Now, like we saw in the house, we're looking for 120, but that's okay. You have a 10% factor with AC voltage. So here I'm checking the other outlet just to make sure it's good. And here what I'm doing is I'm switching to hertz. And where my finger is, you can see I'm at 59 hertz. It's a little low. You want 60 hertz. So that tells me that the engine is spinning a little slower than it should. And that's kind of expected because remember we cleaned the whole carburetor out, and I know I've tuned this thing so that way I can weld better. But now that the carburetor's cleaned and everything's looking good for it, we should be able to pick up that speed and tune it properly. So I'm headed over to the carburetor, and that bottom main jet is adjustable in the bottom of the carburetor where my fingers are right now. And I am first turning the needle valve counterclockwise, and I notice that the engine bogs down a little bit. That tells you I'm giving it too much fuel. So instead, I'm turning it clockwise, and what that does is I am restricting the amount of fuel going through the main jet. And instead, I am getting more air going through the carburetor. When you add more air, it's going to burn hotter and spin the motor faster. If you add too much air, it'll start popping and misfiring. And the same is true with when you add more fuel. Is if you add too much, the motor's going to bog down a little bit. So now I'm testing to see what the hertz is now that I retuned it. And now that it sounds better to look, I am much closer to 60 hertz. And that is acceptable for me. So I'm happy with that. We were able to pick up, 1 hertz just by tuning it out in the carburetor. So I think that's pretty neat. There are much more fancier ways to do this to get the job done, but this is just the way that I came up with. So next, what I'm going to do is grab some pieces of equipment so we can test the voltage and make sure that the motor doesn't bog down. So I'm going into the garage to get an angle grinder, and I'm going to plug that in, and we want to make sure that it powers the angle grinder. This is about, I think, 12 amps, so the motor should not bog down that much, and it was running really good. So I said, okay, now let's add more power to it so it can handle the angle grinder no problem. Let's do a welder. So I have this cheap little stick welder someone gave to me, and I was like, oh, let's see if it'll weld with this. I didn't clean the metal or nothing, but it is welding it just fine. You can see it popping a little bit. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video. I really wanted to make this video to show you how easy it is to work on your own stuff, like your generator. Everything I did here was basic stuff, changing the oil, the spark plug, the fuel filter, cleaning out the air, Even cleaning the carburetor. Cleaning the carburetor may sound crazy, but it is really straightforward. You just have to be careful with the small components inside the carburetor. One important key thing that I really want to show you guys is to properly tune your generator. So when your generator is operating properly, you should have good voltage, which you saw. Our home voltage was 122. The generator is putting out about 130. Now with electricity, especially AC, you have about 10% factor. So if we're at a 120, we're looking for 10% is 12, 132 is acceptable. So we're within the acceptable voltage range of this. And the other thing you want to look at is your hertz. Now we could have just left it as is. You saw it was at like 59 hertz. But ideally we should pick the speed up of the engine a little bit, so that way we're putting out closer to 60 hertz. And the way I adjusted the speed on this engine is I tuned it within the carburetor. So what I did is I adjusted the main jet under the carburetor, and what that does is that adjusts the amount of fuel actually going through the main jet. I turn that back a little bit, so that way we're getting a little more air. When you get a little more air in your more air in your carburetor, you're going to burn a little faster, hence the speed picked up on the generator, and you saw we were up at 60 hertz. There are way more fancier ways that you can get proper hertz, but again, I'm just showing you the real basic, easy functions to do so. Alright, I hope you guys have a great one. I'll see you next time.